Today is May 5th, 2007. I am Cassie Potasic, and it is a pleasure to conduct this interview for the Dakota Memories Oral History Project in Moorhead, Minnesota. Can you please tell me your full name, including your maiden name?
My name is Ruth Rosa Korus Johnson.
All right. And when and where were you born?
I was born January 7th, 1921 in Mertz Township in Sheridan County near Denif, North Dakota.
Okay. And have you ever heard an interesting story about when you were born? About your birth?
No.
Okay.
Never.
And can you share some of your earliest childhood memories with us?
Well, I grew up on a farm and I went to a one-room country school in Mertz Township, about a mile, maybe a little further than a mile, and in the nice weather we'd walk to school. In the wintertime we had my dad had what they called it, a butki, as I remember.
Okay.
And it was put on sleds or sleighs, and then we'd be drawn by. My dad would take us children to school. I was the number 8 in the family, so
and how many
of 11 children.
11. Wow.
And then I just remember going to school. In the spring, we'd like to go out in the prairie. You know, there were a lot of where the cattle would graze. And one thing I remember is picking crocuses early in the spring, looking for crocuses out in the prairies, fields. Yeah. And then what I remember next was the Depression days, when it was hot and the crops were very poor. We'd go out, and I remember distinctly the one summer in the 30s, but there were no crops, and we'd go out and pick thistles. Oh. That was the only thing that kind of grew, and my dad and my big brothers would chop them up for the cattle, feed for cattle. Oh, yeah. And I remember my brother that was 2 years older than I, and a sister that was 2 years younger.
And what were their names?
My brother was Willie, okay, and my sister was Delilia. And I remember one thing I remember is we wore overalls, but a full suit. Okay. Not a full suit of overalls. Yeah. And we kind of had a little area in the south side of the house where we'd kind of, it was like a sandbox, or we'd kind of sit and try to cool off because it was hot summers.
Yeah. Well, sounds like you had some interesting times during the Depression. Can you tell me more about when you went to school? But you said you went to a one-room schoolhouse. Were there a lot of children that went to your school?
Not very many. Perhaps a few some cousins of my uncle's children. And then next door, just north of our farm, were the Rittenbachs, and the first Mrs. Rittenbach was my dad's sister Maria, and she died and I was told about this like in 1909. She died in a prairie fire. Oh wow! And of course I wasn't born until 21, so it's just things that I remember being told. Right. And we'd walk to school when the weather was nice, and then when it was bad, I think, it always take the children by horse-drawn.
Right. The boot camp, right?
Well, in the wintertime, the boot camp. In the summertime, buggy, or I really don't remember it much, but.
All right. What did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, I probably didn't have any ambitions,
Yeah.
but I had an older sister that had gone to business college. The oldest sibling in the family, business
Okay.
college in Fargo.
And her name was?
Emma.
Emma. Okay.
And I suppose I thought I probably wanted to go to business college too.
Be like her.
I'm sorry?
And be like her.
Well, I don't know. It was probably the only ambition I had. And then my next oldest sister had gone to beauty school in Fargo.
Oh, okay.
And but I never wanted to be a beauty operator. So probably business or college was.
Yeah. So did most of your siblings go on to some sort of college?
Well, my oldest brother didn't. He stayed and farmed.
Okay.
And then the next oldest, or younger than the oldest one, he was actually the fourth in the family. There were two, my old brother and then two girls. It was Emma, Ella, and then Gideon.
Okay.
He went on to business college, and when he finished business college, he went to Bismarck and got a job with, I think, in the state capitol, and then went on. He went on to Baltimore, Maryland, and when Social Security was first started, and he worked in the Social Security department in Washington, D.C., or Baltimore, I think is where it was. But I remember him coming home and telling about the other Korus names he found as having worked in with the Social Security, as it was first for me formed. And I think because my oldest sister and this brother had gone on to business college, I probably wanted to. So I think I was the third one in the family who went on to business college in Fargo.
Oh, you did go to business college in Fargo?
Yeah. Well, I finished I went to elementary school in this one-room schoolhouse. Right. And then when I was in ninth grade, there was a high school in Denver. In fact, it was a new school building, and we thought it was very nice. It had all the grades and the high school, but I did go to ninth grade.
Okay.
And then when I was a sophomore, my sister that lived in Fargo.
Which sister was that?
Emma.
Emma.
And
okay.
And she was married in 1929, and she worked for Royal Jewelers in Fargo, and her husband worked at the Fargo Foundry. But they had bought a house in 29, and she needed somebody to do a little housework while she was working. She asked my mom or suggested to my mom that maybe I should come and live with them and go to high school in Fargo. And so I went home with her, and I went to high school for 3 years and graduated from Fargo Central High School. And then went on to business college for a year from 1938, the fall of 38 until the fall of 39.
Okay. Was it a really big change leaving your one-room schoolhouse to go to high school in Fargo?
Well, I went to high school 1 year in Denov.
Okay.
And even then, we lived 7 miles from Denov, and we rented rooms in people's homes in town. Of course, at that time, Denov was a kind of a bustling town. It had a drugstore. I remember going over there and getting ice cream cones as I was growing up before, while I was in elementary school. And there was a bank and a hotel and 2 stores, a general merchandise store and a grocery store, which, as of today, there is nothing there. The only thing is a senior community room that they've built, what was a post office, I think. But I remember it is and I remember my dad asking my dad one time, when you came over here, did you have any money? And he said, not much. And I says, how did you get started on the farm? And he says, well, we got a loan from the bank.
Yeah.
And And he survived the crash, in '29, and a lot of farmers lost their property, but in fact, my older brother just told me a few years ago, before he died, he was 90 years old, this Gideon, that my dad was a smart farmer. Yeah. Because he had farmed in Europe.
Right.
But like, I have some pictures where he's got, in fact, I was looking for a picture where in 1912, or probably 1914, he had a car, they had horses, they had a barn. And they were married in 1905, but by 1914 he had a car, and it was a Ford, and the top was down, and my three oldest siblings was in the back seat, John, Ella, and Emma. And Gideon was sitting by Mom in the front seat, and Frida was a baby, so she was born in 12, I think. She's 93 now. That he was I thought quite in that big barn. Yeah. You get a picture of the barn, and so, we didn't think of us as kids, being Germans or descendants from the Germans from Russia. Yeah. We just, everybody, the neighbors, a lot of them were related. Like my grandma and grandpa lived. My mom's parents lived just a mile, they homesteaded, were in the sod house. In fact, that's a picture over there. It's sod house. It's still ruins, remains of it.
Was it largely then your cousins that you went to school with in elementary school?
Yeah, well, it was the Rittenbachs, but see, my dad's sister died in 1909, and he remarried, so it was the children from his second marriage that were my age. There were and then the cousins from the Berksers who lived a mile on the other, east of there, their kids. So it was mostly cousins. Well, the Rittenbachs were from his second marriage, so they were.
Did you consider them cousins?
We probably were pretty close.
Okay. So did you ever have to stay home from school and help out with work or chores?
No, because I had so many older siblings that I did have to milk cows, which I detested. Maybe maybe when it was in 8th and 9th grade. Yeah. But and we'd gather eggs. We had a chicken coop. We had Mom had raised chickens and ducks. There was kind of a pond near our farm shed. But that's probably the only work I really did, because there were always these older siblings that did the housework and the chores.
Did you have to help at all with the garden or anything like that?
No. I don't know. Maybe we did a little hoeing, because we had big gardens. But they had a big plot of gardens and raised, a lot of potatoes and vegetables. I remember mostly potatoes and root carrots maybe, and root crops, but
now, so you said mostly taking eggs, mostly milking.
I'd be doing some milking, which probably, and then herding the cattle would be out in the pasture, and when it was milking time in the evening, we'd probably have to go out. We'd take a dog. We always had dogs, nice Fidos. I remember one name, and bring the cows home to milk. Right. It's probably didn't do a great deal of work. Seems to have played more than worked.
What kind of games did you play?
I think we played some baseball.
Yeah.
You know, probably with when company would come with other children our age.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember too much about it. We had dolls.
Okay.
Played with dolls, and then we'd play house a lot. I know my sister was 2 years younger than I, Delilah. We'd play house a lot, and we'd set up our little pretend houses in the granaries.
Yeah.
And one thing I remember, my brother he's 80 now. He was about he was born in 26, so he was about 9 years younger than I. And he'd have to be our maid. And he reminds us now how we used to put an apron on him, and he'd be the maid, you know.
Yeah. Did you largely play with your sisters, or?
Yes, the sister that's 2 years younger than I. In fact, she's 1 month lacking 2 years. She was born in November, and I was born in January, the year before. And we played together a lot. And now I see all these pictures that my sister used to take of us together. You know, how close we were. She and I were pretty close, but we'd fight a lot too. I remember, we'd sleep together, and we'd have. I remember more of we'd claw each other. But there must have been some good times too. I remember these bad times we had.
Yeah. What did you usually fight about?
I don't know what it was. We'd scrap.
Yeah.
I don't know why we had disagreements. I really don't remember.
Just being sisters, huh?
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned that you slept together with this sister. Did you share bedrooms with a lot of your siblings, or was it just?
Well, we only had 3 bedrooms, and at one time, I know my brothers had 2 beds in there, and the boys always had that bedroom. It was kind of added on to the side of the house, but I remember that was the boys' bedroom, and then there was Mom and Dad's bedroom, but they also had 2 beds in there. And I remember the youngest ones would always be in that second bed, and then there was one bed where the girls would be. So it was 2 older sisters, 2 of the 3 older sisters. And then Delilah and I, when Ray and Norma, the youngest ones, would use that second bed in Mom and Dad's bedroom, we had a Davenport that opened up to a bed.
Okay.
And Delilah and I slept out in the living room in that.
Oh, okay.
And I remember we're the only ones that slept in that living room, as I remember, because the older ones had probably left.
Let's see. Now, did your dad was a farmer.
Right.
Did he help around the house at all, doing any of the inside chores, or was that largely your mom and your older sisters?
As I remember, it was mostly Mom and my older sisters that did the cooking, and there was a pantry, and I remember the 2 of the older sisters would do the cooking. I suppose before I was born, Mom probably did all the cooking, but my dad, I don't recall, except that they'd butcher, the hog and cattle, and he'd do that.
Right.
With the butchering, and they'd make sausage, and they'd get together with some neighbors, and they had a grinder where they'd grind sausage, and they bought casings and made sausage, and Mom would can meats. She'd can chickens, and she'd even canned, I remember her canning beef in glass jars and baking them in the oven.
Yeah.
And then they butchered meat in the fall, they'd also kind of put it in, like the sausage, I think they kind of melt lard and put it in lard outside.
Was this kind of like an annual event? The neighbors would come over and you'd have a butchering, sausage making?
Yes, I think so. And then I think maybe my dad would help. I don't recall too clearly, help other neighbors. They'd get together.
Right. Can you tell me? We're gonna go back to school now. Can you tell me what it was like to go to high school in Fargo?
It wasn't easy, except that I made some friends that lived in the neighborhood of where my sister lived, and I lived with her, who also lived with her brother.
Okay.
And so we became friends, and we had kind of had that in common. So there were a few other, but not many. But it was difficult to come from a small area, having gone to a small school where you knew everybody and have to come to Fargo. But then there were some neighbors, my sister's neighbors across the street that I know the one, she was older than I. She was probably a senior when I was a sophomore. And, she kind of helped me. You'd go to school. And I made some friends in the neighborhood, also some of the girls that were my age.
What kind of classes did you take?
Well, I took business. I took typing and bookkeeping, and they taught in shorthand. They taught that at Fargo Central High, and then English and history and biology. I remember in sophomore year being in a biology class in Fargo. They had to get a bug collection.
Yeah.
And I remember making quite a pretty good bug collection. Yeah. And that's kind of what I remember, but it was difficult, because there were a lot of kind of well-to-do people, students, and it wasn't easy.
Yeah. I suppose it was difficult just coming from a completely different background than a lot of those people. Did you continue to live with your sister when you went on to college?
Yes, I did. I'd go home in the summertime. I'd be just there for the school year, and then I'd be up on the farm, after the sophomore and junior year, and then in the senior year, and then the fall graduated in the spring in that fall, and then I went to Dakota Business College in Fargo for a year. And that was easier, and then I knew some of them, a few neighbor people that were also enrolled in business college.
Right. While you were in Fargo going to high school and college, what kind of activities did you do for fun? What kind of social things did you do?
Well, probably went to movies, and in the wintertime we'd go tobogganing.
Oh, yeah?
There was a toboggan slide. It's before you went to Island Park on the south side of Island Park. They had a toboggan slide.
Okay.
I remember doing that. And I tried ice skating, and I was never very good at it. And so
were you involved in any clubs or anything like that while you were in school?
Well, at Fargo High, they had a history club. I never belonged to that.
Okay.
Played some, well, no, I guess I didn't really belong to anything else.
What kind of activities did you do through the history club?
Oh, we'd have some meetings and talk about some of the current events or what was going on.
Right. What kind of movies did you see when you went to the movies?
I'm sorry?
What kind of movies did you see?
I remember going, I think I have a lapse of memory, but Clark Gable and Gone with the Wind.
Oh, yeah.
I remember that was really impressive.
Yeah.
And a lot of musical. I like, they had a lot of good musical movies and, dancing. And I think I like those probably the best.
Yeah. Who did you usually go to movies with?
With some of them, we'd usually go on Sunday afternoon.
Okay.
I remember the day of Pearl Harbor very distinctly. I'd been to a movie and came home, and my sister and brother-in-law were listening to the radio, the bombing in Pearl Harbor. And I don't remember what the movie was, but I remember with some girlfriends in the neighborhood we'd gone to movies.
Right. Did you ever go to dances or anything like that at school?
No.
No.
Probably a prom, I think maybe when I was a senior, and you didn't have to go with a date, the girls would just come alone.
Right.
But
Not a lot.
not a lot of dancing.
Okay. How old were you when you started dating?
Probably a year after I graduated from business college. I never dated in high school.
Okay.
Never had a date. But when I was finishing business college, they'd send me out to temporary jobs, and then I met who became my husband through some friends from business college, and she was also a neighbor, and so we lived in Fargo, but she was had a friend from Moorhead, and it was actually through her that I met my husband.
What kind of dates did you guys go on?
We'd go to movies.
Yeah.
We'd also, there were some nightclubs.
Yeah.
I don't remember the names of them, out in east of Moorhead.
Okay.
And because I dated a Moorhead person and was with a group of Moorhead people. And we'd go to...
Can you tell me about these nightclubs?
I'm sorry?
Can you tell me about the nightclubs?
Well, I think I had live music, and there were a lot of people, and I don't think they exist. There were several of them that were east of Moorhead. One was called the Venice Gardens. I don't remember what the names of the others were. There were several of them. Merry-Go-Round or something like that, out toward south of Moorhead. I don't remember for sure.
Okay.
But it was movies and...
Okay. How long did you date before you got married?
Well, I suppose I started dating my husband well, he went in the service he joined the Navy in October of 42, and we'd probably been dating for about a year.
Okay.
So I remember he came over and he gave me my diamond. In fact, I've still got it, but it's because he was going to go in the Navy.
Yeah.
And anyway, I was so surprised, and I remember I didn't really want to accept it, and because he was going to be leaving.
Yeah.
But I suppose I had dated him for about a year before he went, and then a year later, I went out to San Francisco. He was stationed aboard a troop transport.
Okay.
And San Francisco was they were taking troops across in the Pacific, and of course he was an electrician on the ship, and some of his people in his division had wives, and they were there, and he was lonely, and so he wanted me to come out there, and I think I quit my job. I had my permanent job after I graduated from business college was for Armor and Company.
Okay.
The meat packing, and the plant was out in West Fargo. So I worked in the office. In fact, I'd gotten a job. Jobs were kind of hard to get in 41.
Yeah.
And in 40. Well, in 40. But it was a friend of my sister's that he was in the office for Armor, and he kind of got me a job, and it was through him that I got the job. So then I had to quit my job. I'd worked there a year, I suppose, until 43. Well, maybe over a year. And I packed up and took the train to San Francisco, and he was there, and we got married.
In San Francisco?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Was your family there for your wedding, or?
Well, I had some cousins that lived in Oakland.
Okay.
My dad's brothers. Well, my dad's brother died in the flu in 1918, but they had. I had quite a few cousins, and they had they'd moved out to California. So I contacted my cousin who lived in Oakland, and she came, and we just went to a parsonage and were married, and she came, and she and her husband, and then a friend of Bill's from the ship. We were married in the parsonage of a church.
Was it hard to do that without your parents there, or?
I'm sorry?
Was it difficult for you to get married without your parents and your family?
No, it wasn't, because my two sisters were married. Well, in fact, three sisters and a brother, and none of them really had big weddings. They all just kind of went on their own and got married. Like my oldest sister, who lived in Fargo, they just went to the church with friends and got married, and so did my brother. Got married out in the East Coast in Baltimore. He was working, and my other sister, they just kind of went. They didn't have big weddings, or they just kind of went and got married.
Yeah. Can you tell me more about your wedding then? You said you went to a parsonage to get married.
Yeah, I looked up being brought up Lutheran. Looked up a Lutheran church and called there, and we went to the parsonage and were married there in the parsonage with my cousin and her husband and Bill's friend, with just a few of us.
Yeah. Did you get a new dress, or did you get a new dress to wear for your wedding, or did you have any kind of celebration afterwards?
Well, we went out to eat.
Yeah.
And I don't know, the problem then was to find a place to stay, because Bill had gotten a hotel room in downtown. Remember, the name of the hotel was Will Rogers Hotel. It was just kind of a small hotel, but then, he would just come in. The ship they'd take troops out to mostly Australia, and so it was kind of a problem finding a place but live, except that there were places, they had organizations, the Women for Servicemen, to help them find places to live. And we found a room, and then I met a couple friends that I knew in Fargo who were in San Francisco, and we ended up getting rooms in it was in Haight-Ashbury. Yeah. It was on Page Street, but I remember my son graduated from law school in Berkeley in '75, and we went out there, and the hippies were living in Haight-Ashbury where we drove by. Then it was, I think it was kind of the end of their era, and it seems to me the house I used to live in, except the windows were boarded up. They were, they had kind of, but then a few years ago I was out there, and now, they had put a garage under the house, which wasn't there when I rented a room.
Yeah. Did you go on any kind of, I suppose it was not possible to go on a honeymoon because he was in the Navy.
No, he was probably there, he did probably stay in port a week or so. Well, then, see, we were married in October, and then in the spring when he left on that one trip, they went to Bombay, India.
Oh, wow.
And ended up in Boston, Massachusetts. The ship then when they came back from Bombay, they went through the Canal Zone and ended up in Boston, and then the ship made many trips. I have, well, in fact, while he was on the ship, he'd always kept a diary of when they left a port and where they went and when they, and so then after we were married, then I kept it. But anyway, he thought they'd come back to the Pacific. Well, in fact, they were getting ready for the invasion of, what they call it, D-Day, or when they invaded Germany, from England. And some of the wives that I'd become acquainted with that were in his division had already gone out to Boston, and then and then one of the other wives ended up going to Boston too, not until the fall, September of that 44.
Okay. Was it difficult being married to a guy in the Navy?
Well, I don't know. I thought it was kind of exciting at the time. We probably didn't take the war as seriously as we should have. I was looking, it was an experience for me to go out to the West Coast and then ending up on the East Coast. And then the ship didn't always come into Boston, it'd come to New York. And then I lived with a group of wives in Boston, and we'd get on the bus and go to New York while they were there. I remember spending New Year's Eve in New York City in 44, 45. And then one time they came to Newport News, so we'd take the bus and go down there. And so, it's kind of strange, the experience of seeing so much of the United States.
Yeah, I bet you that was fascinating.
Yeah, and it was kind of fun.
Yeah. Did you make a lot of close friends with the other wives?
Yes, it really did. In fact, in Boston, we sublet a whole floor. A lady rented out rooms. She rented the whole floor, and then there were like 3 stories, and then there'd be some of the wives were we were in 3rd floor, and so a group of wives from the ship were in the 2nd floor. And, really close friends with them. But most of them aren't even here anymore. In the last few years, a lot of these wives have died.
Had you stayed in close touch with them?
We did.
Yeah.
We made trips out to California. There was a friend, several lived in California, and a friend, one of the couple who was the best man for our wedding, they lived in Missouri. And we'd visit. They'd come and visit us, and we'd visit them. And it was close friends.
So, how long or when did you and your husband move back to this area?
Well, Bill was discharged in November of 45. I came home in the spring of 45. The ship was put into dry dock for repairs in Brooklyn, New York,
Okay.
and so he got a leave, and we came home, and I was pregnant.
Okay.
And then I stayed home, and my sister Delilah, whose husband was in the Air Force, was also in Fargo, so she and I rented rented an apartment. And both our husbands came home in November. They were both discharged about the same time.
Okay.
But her husband was from Wyoming, so they went back to his home in Wyoming, and then so then I had the apartment by myself when he was discharged in November, and we lived in the apartment until we bought a house in Moorhead in 46.
Okay.
And my oldest child was born in February of 45.
Okay.
And then Bill got a job with the city of Moorhead. He had a friend that worked there who wasn't in the service. He got a medical, exemption. But he got a job and worked there until he retired in 1978.
Okay. So while you were all over the country before you moved back, did you ever come back to visit your family during that time, or did you mostly just stay in
No,
contact?
I didn't come back until I came back to
Okay.
stay in the spring of 45, or it was May or June, or May or June.
Did you guys write a lot of letters back and forth, you and your sisters and your parents?
Yes, we did.
Your sister also married a man in the Air Force? Did any of your brothers join?
Yes, Gideon, my brother, was in the Navy, and he was just stationed well, when he went in the service, they moved from the East Coast. He was married, and they moved to the state of Washington, where her folks lived. So he was just stationed in Washington. And then the next brother went in the Army, but he got a medical discharge. I don't know if it was, well, besides the medical, they could get deferred if they had to help on the farm.
Oh, okay.
And then my next brother was in the Navy. His name was Willie. And he came to San Francisco when I was out there, and he was shipped to overseas to New Caledonia. And tragically, he drowned in the spring of 45 in New Caledonia. So that was very hard on my mom.
Yeah.
Because he was kind of I don't know if there's such a thing as a favorite son, but he was very close to my mom. And it was right after I had come back to stay from out east in that spring of 45, and I think I had been home a month, and Bill had to go back because the ship had been repaired, and they were going to make trips to Europe. So it was a sad summer, took care of his. He was also an electrician, and he was out on a barge, where a ship was anchored out at sea. And it was never clear just what happened, but anyway, he fell off the barge. He went on a barge when they made repairs on the ship. I don't know how, but anyway, he drowned. And And then my younger brother, Ray, that was younger than I, he enlisted in the Navy too, but he was able to get a discharge. He wasn't in very long.
Okay. And why did he get discharged?
Well, the war was over then, and
okay. All right. Why do you think it's important to tell your life story? Why do you think it was important to tell your story for this interview?
well, I suppose for the information for the library at NDSU.
Do you think it's important to preserve your life stories?
Yes, only I'm sorry I don't recall as much as I wish I knew more about my, parents, and I feel that I'm not very well informed.
Are there any other thoughts or observations you would like to share with us?
I don't know. I believe I've probably said as much as I know. I can't think of anything else that I should. I think I've covered my memory of most of it.
All right, well, thank you so much for being willing to do this interview.